Hi, I'm Tina Farhat. Welcome to today's episode of Her Path to Success. Today we have a treat. We have with us Anne Doyle, a successful American author of a book called Powering Up: How America's Women Achievers Become Leaders. Anne, welcome.
I'm thrilled to be here, Tina.
Thank you. It's a pleasure having you. So Anne, why don't you start us off? You did an interesting thing in the book where you divided different generations of women in America and what they had to go through in order to reach their, success in business or politics. You divided that up into 3 different sections. Why don't you explain that to us?
Well, I thought it was really important for us as high-achieving women. There are millions of us now in the world, but let's just talk about the United States. But there's 3 very distinct generations of these high-achieving, aspiring women, and I feel that we don't understand each other. And so when I was working on this book, I felt that the number one thing we needed to do, that I felt that I could talk to all 3 generations, and I wanted the generations to understand the differences, because each generation has strengths and each generation has some weaknesses. And for us to achieve the next level, we're going to have to support each other. Mm-hmm. And so the 3 generations are really my generation. We're in our mid-50s and older now. And so I call us the pioneering interlopers. And we really were that generation of women who came out of college in the early 70s and have first all over our resumes, whatever field it was. We tended to be not only the only woman doing whatever job it was, whether it was a lawyer or whether it was a surgeon or whether it was me trying to get into men's locker rooms. All those pieces, not only were we the first, we tended to be the first professional woman that those men had ever worked with, who were peers. So then, and we're really the feminists. Mm-hmm. Next generation, very, very different. These women I call the influential insiders. And they are right now kind of late 30s up into the early 50s. Very different from pioneering interlopers. They're the I'm no feminist but women. Because the pioneering interlopers, we grew up being told, no, you can't. No, you can't be a CEO. No, you can't be a lawyer. No, you can't, all these things. By the time the influential insiders came along, they were right after our generation. More MBAs, more law degrees, and there were opportunities for them, but there tended to be only a job for one woman. And so they were told, maybe you can. And what happened was they tended to see other women as their competition. Mm-hmm. They didn't help each other. And now you have your generation. And you're really the Gen Ys, and I'm just talking about high-achieving women here. That's who I'm talking about. And so you're really the women just graduating from college now and up into early 30s. And I call them the I'll do it my way innovators. Also very, very different breed of cat. Because how did you grow up, Tina? I bet you grew up being told, yes, you can.
Absolutely.
Yes, you can do anything.
And in fact, when my parents immigrated to the United States, neither one of my parents had an education, past elementary school, barely that. So I grew up with a household with a very strong mother who really, ingrained in her children, we were, all girls at the time, that education comes first. And you can do anything, you have to do it, so it was a natural progression.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, and even though she didn't have those opportunities, she knew that when she came to America, that's what we were here for. That was our right.
And you got an incredible message. That was great. And your generation, I love how confident your generation is. Absolute confidence that we didn't have, really. It took us much longer to get that level of confidence. But the one thing about your generation, I would say, is you haven't had to fight. You have not had to fight, because by the time you came along, those roads were paved.
Right.
They're super highways now, but and I'm happy about that. But there's jungle ahead. Believe me, there is jungle ahead.
So what do you see as the biggest obstacle in communicating or supporting each other between these generations, between these groups?
Well, number one, I believe women are in kindergarten when it comes to understanding how to leverage collective power and understanding how to help one another in the way that men have been doing for centuries. So men are, of course, very, very competitive with one another. But they've also been doing it for so long that young men grow up watching the older men do it, and so it's very natural to them to mentor, to develop younger men, to help other younger men, to sponsor them, to put them into the talent pipeline, to give each other business, to be rainmakers for one another. All these kinds of things are so intuitive to men because it's part of their professional culture. It's brand new stuff for women. We're just learning how to do it.
It's true, and I want to laugh because my professional work is in wealth management. So it's a very male-dominated industry, as you know. And one of the things that I was taught early on is how to network, how to reach out to people, make sure that you can provide value to someone, whether or not they're doing business with you. But if you do, you build that relationship, and that's the most valuable thing that we can do going on. And sometimes I find it easier when I'm sitting with men because they're a lot more willing to open their Rolodex, their relationships, introduce me to people, as opposed to sometimes when I'm sitting with women, everything is a little more closely held.
Yes,
like why do you need to know
it.
this? I've seen it.
Right.
I have.
And there are several reasons for that. I mean, think about it. I just think women haven't learned how to do it yet. I mean, if you think about the fact that, men were voting in this country for 125 years before we could vote. And it took us 75 years of fighting to get the right to vote. Yeah. And then that we've really only been in the professions in big numbers for about 4 decades.
Okay.
I mean, that's nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's understandable. It's not that women can't do it. It's
Right.
not that women are catty and won't do it. It's that we need to learn how to do it, and this is the next level of skill. And this is being rainmakers for one another and helping lift each other.
Okay. So, in your book, you do discuss an entire section about why girls don't rule. Why don't you take us through some of those points?
Well, some of it is this, of course. I mean, the big piece is because, if you think about the fact that we are 51% of the world's population, we're half of the human race, men are not the norm, we are half of it, and now we're half of the workforce too. And now we have big, big, big numbers in terms of women even moving into higher leadership roles where we can develop younger women, we can promote them. But it's this whole piece, number one, of, I call it the tribe divide.
Okay.
There's 3 things. There's the tribe divide, there's the mother divide, and there's the color divide. Are 3 big forces at work with women. And the tribe divide is just this piece about women. I like to say every woman for herself is a losing strategy. We've got to start understanding that we've got to forget about, taking any pride in being the only one. Those days are really past. Now we have to be conscious about going for collective influence. That's what we need now, is collective influence for women to be shaping decisions that affect the human family appropriately in terms of us being 51% of the population. And so that's the number one. Another huge piece is the mother divide. This is this whole thing about, who's a better mother? Full-time stay-at-home mothers or working mothers or all this kind of stuff. Men do not have this argument. There's no judgment about that. And it's really undermining women. It makes women are carrying all kinds of guilt about trying to do absolutely everything. And I had a man say to me one time, "What is this guilt thing with women?" He said, "You know what? My wife spends so much more time with the kids." And he said, "And I'm a great father, but she has all this guilt." And we as women need to not criticize. I mean, put down our weapons and stop criticizing how women are. If someone is a good mother, she's a working mother, she's a full-time mother, and any good mother is. But also another really important thing is for women who are in the workforce, need to look at the skills that women are fine-tuning, doing human development, which is what raising children is all about. They're directly transferable to managing people in the workforce. Those are skills, and women need to own them and need to help women who took some time off from work to, let's say, full-time develop those next generation of students and employees. But they also have some great skills. They need to write that into their resume.
And it always seems to be, a competition almost between, decisions that we make. I made a decision not to have children and to devote myself to my career. The other person, I made a decision to devote myself to my family, and that comes first. And it's very difficult. It seems to be an all or nothing situation, and women who do tend to work have the brunt of the household to manage as well, even if she is married. That just seems to be, an amazing task for a lot of women. And this is in the United States, where you'd think that we would have found some sort of balance to this since we have been in the workforce for so long, and it's been an expectation, at least since World War II, and we started contributing, because it was needed,
Right. Well, we need to fix that. And that has to be fixed. I tell young women, be very, very careful who you marry. Be very careful who you marry if you want to also have a career. And Sheryl Sandberg talks about this in her book, Lean In. She says, make your partner a full partner. And so a lot of that has to do with women expecting and requiring, men who want to be fathers to be full-time partners in terms of the work of raising a child and having a home. And women have shown that we can do the work that used to be considered men's work, but men have not stepped up yet in terms of showing that they are willing, they're certainly capable, willing to do the work that in the past has been considered women's work. Right. It's not women's work, it's parents' work. Yeah. If you want a family, it's parents' work.
It is. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. I'm a mother, it's a lot of work.
It is.
Right.
So then you also talk about the color divide, which is obviously specific to America's experience, but tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I'm sure that in different cultures all over the world, you always have these different divides, unfortunately, it's something human nature is still struggling with. But in this country, basically where white has been the dominant power, let's say, through most of our history, and you have all this history in terms of African Americans as slaves, and now you have more and more Hispanics. People from a lot of other cultures, in our culture now are becoming a tremendously diverse culture, and that's the good thing. But I was shocked, and a lot of white women were shocked, at some research that has been done by Working Mother magazine about mistrust between white women and women of color. And I really had to educate myself about this because I was very naive about it in terms of white women sometimes sort of forgetting the advantage that we were born into. And not being conscious enough to sort of reach across those color lines and build those relationships. It's so easy just to hang out with people who are just like you.
Right.
And there's a chapter, one of my skills, leadership skills, I call Drink at Dangerous Waters, and that's constantly getting yourself out of your comfort zone. And a lot of that has to do with who are you spending your time with? Who are you socializing with? Who are you making, reaching across culture differences? Because we're enriched by it, but it's so easy not to do it. And it creates, and there's a lot of mistrust there that we have to work on.
That's true. And you're right, with regards to different caste systems and, social standings, whether it's economic, or skin color based or religious, minorities and that sort of thing. Let me ask you, what's the biggest obstacle in overcoming that? We can, try to reach out, but most people do tend to be, geographically and socially in their groups. How do you do that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, number one, to be conscious of it. Pay attention to who you're socializing with. Pay attention to who invites you to their home and who you invite to your home. And if you say, wow, those people are all kind of a lot like me, do something about it. Do something about it. And you know what? You will be enriched. And one of the things that I did was I put myself through Leadership Detroit. because I said, okay, I live in Oakland County, and it's just too easy to hang out with people who live close or, you know, that you run into in Oakland County. And so I immersed myself in Leadership Detroit, which is a great one-year development program, and it's one of the most diverse programs I've ever gone through. Okay. In terms of culturally, from a gender point of view, from all kinds of background points of view. And these were all people who wanted to engage around leadership with other people different than them. And I made some wonderful friends. That's one way. You can do it many, many ways. But start by looking at who you're spending time with. And then I'll bet you have acquaintances. But try to turn those acquaintances into friends.
Right. That's absolutely true. So, you know, you also talk about some mistakes that women generally make as far as, you know, trying to get ahead. You know, and one thing that you mentioned is playing the guys' game. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Wow, we could talk for a long time about that. You know, I mean, and that is something that it was also sort of developmental. When I've looked at this whole thing about women moving from being high achievers, which is where we are now, to making this leap to leadership, which is really our next frontier. And so you have to kind of look at it in context. And the context is that how we got where we are now was we had to be able to get along with the guys, be one of the guys, because you often were the only woman. And so it's very, very important to be able to get along with the guys. But the next step from that is now not to make the mistake of separating yourself from your natural cultural tribe, because we're never, ever truly going to be one of the guys. I mean, women need to obviously work well with men, get along with men, understand men, all those kinds of things. But you're just never going to be one of the guys. I don't care how good your golf game is. I don't care how much you know about sports. You're not going to be one of the guys. And so now we have to say, okay, we've mastered that part of the game. The next part of the game is now turning back to women and basically helping to lift women.
It's interesting, you know, the way that you phrase that, because, you know, I used to work for the largest women-owned company in the state of Michigan.
Which was
Plastic Engineered Products. It was $1.5 billion privately owned business. The owner was a Vietnamese refugee. You know, she came here and she had the opportunity to go to college, pour herself through school, started working at Ford Motor Company, and then had the opportunity to open her new company. And she did. And although it was a women-owned business, there were very few women in leadership positions. And I worked in the business development or sales area of the organization. And, you know, a lot of the men in that sales group were the managers. They were the vice presidents. And the women were the account managers. So you saw that gender divide. And I actually approached her about instituting a women's development program. And she said, Tina, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll give you the leeway, do one meeting, and then I'll see if I like it. So I did. And it was great. It took off. So once a month, all the women from, you know, the corporate office and some of our local manufacturing facilities would get together, and we would discuss the state of the health of the business, and we would make decisions. And it got to the point where the next morning, all the men, the vice presidents, you know, the managers would come to us and say, okay, so what did you guys discuss? What are we doing? So it really flipped the tables around, you know.
That
and
is fantastic.
It is. It finally gave a voice to, you know, to people who were doing the work. And it's not that the women weren't qualified to have these leadership positions.
Right.
You know, we just didn't have a formal system, you know, that enabled them, you know, to move up the ladder. And as a result of that program, we had nearly 10 women become vice presidents of, you know, just and directors just from that program.
See, I love that, because what I want is, instead of, you know, sitting around and whining or complaining,
which was happening quite a bit.
Right, do something about it.
You have
Take
to empower
initiative.
Yourself.
You have to empower yourself. Do something about it. I love that. That's just fantastic.
Yeah, so, you know, it's just, you know, sometimes it's the small steps that you take, you know, and you have to have a little fearlessness, you know, in order to make change happen.
Yes.
You know, because if I hadn't done that, if I didn't have a little fearlessness to approach, you know, the owner of this company, you know, and tell her, I think there's something we could be doing better, you know, and then have her just open up to me and say, all right, I'll give you a shot.
Right.
You know, I mean, it was a challenge. and and I made sure that I met all the expectations and above it. Based
right,
on that.
and it was bringing the women together, right? And you were talking about business topics. It wasn't bringing the women together for socializing.
Exactly.
It was bringing the women together to talk about the business.
It was.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened.
Right. Yeah, one other thing I'd like to say about that is that I've spoken all over the country and actually globally since my book came out, and many, many times I'm speaking to women's affinity groups or like women in leadership roles in big companies. And often they'll say to me, the men were like very nervous about what this is all about. And they would say, why do you need a women's affinity group? What is this all about? And the answer, of course, is because the whole company is a great big men's affinity group, and they're unconscious about it often.
Yes.
They're unconscious about it. And so women are, almost like the foreign nationals, having to move into another country and master another language and their cultural rules. And so it really empowers women to bring them together, as you did.
It does, yeah. And even in my current role, there are very few women who do what I do, and most of the ladies in the office are the assistants.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the advisors or the managers.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to go after it.
You do.
You have to go after
You
it.
have
You
to be
can't
hungry.
sit. And another thing that I like to say is that American women right now are like gorgeous wallflowers that we're all dressed up, tapping our toes to the music, waiting to be invited to the leadership dance.
Oh, and that
I like
never
to
happens.
say, no one is going to invite you to the leadership dance. You have to invite yourself, as you did, and we have to invite other women because other women need to be urged.
Absolutely. So, Anne, you have a very interesting story too, career-wise. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you got to be in this position and what inspired you to write the book?
Well, we're talking about 40 years here now, so let me try to kind of give you the chapters. Okay. So kind of in my soul, the way I move through the world is I'm a reporter, always looking for the story. And the first chapter really of my professional career was as a radio and then television news broadcaster. I'm the daughter of a sports broadcaster, and my mother taught speech and debate at Indiana University. So we were like a communications kind of family. So I was one of that first generation of women, who were on camera doing TV news, reporting in TV news. And then a moment came when I was working out in California and I really wanted to come home, where I was offered the opportunity by Channel 2, which was CBS here in Detroit, to do sports. And at that was 1978. And here I'm the daughter of a sports broadcaster. I've been doing television news for about 8 years or so, and now I've given the opportunity to do sports. And that piece was kind of a next step, because that was another area where women were women were covering sports at that time, and a big problem was because of the locker rooms.
And you made a mention about entering the locker room.
Yeah,
being a huge
right,
obstacle.
because that's how sports is covered. It's an important piece of it, but there were no women covering sports. And so I remember when I was offered the job, I told my dad, I've been offered this job to do sports, and my father said, you take that job. And I said, yeah, but if I take that job, I'm going to have to go into the locker rooms. And my dad said, absolutely. You will have no credibility as a sports reporter if you don't go in those locker rooms. And it was very controversial at the time. My father backed me 100%. And, those were some interesting times. There's stories in my book about that. And I did that for 5 years. So I covered sports, and we really opened the locker rooms during that period of time in this country. But I'm always really looking for the next thing. What's next? What's next? I always want to be growing. And so the next thing really for me was business. And so I had an opportunity to join Ford Motor Company. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of chapter 2. I had an incredible chapter 2 with a great, great company. Went through some great years with Ford, also went through some very, very tough times. I headed up Ford North America Communications during the Firestone Explorer crisis. So
that was during Jack Nasser era,
yeah,
right?
yeah, right. And and then I took an early retirement from Ford. I mean, that was a great, great experience, handling the news media, a lot of global assignments from Ford Motor Company, and also governmental affairs in Washington,
Wow.
D.C. So that was a really important piece, too. And I say at that time we were pushing up against the steel ceiling in the auto industry, and there's a lot of pushing still left to do.
Yeah.
So then I took an early retirement from Ford. I'm a single mother. My son was 11 when I was able to do that, so I was very happy about that because it gave me a lot more flexibility. I did something I've always told other women to do, which is run for office. You know, I've always saying run for office, run for office, run for office, so I finally did that. I'm a city councilwoman in Auburn Hills.
Okay.
And all this time I was thinking about the book, really paying attention to it all. And people always said that I should write a book. And I said, yeah, I have some good stories, but it has to be more than about me. And so I really was looking for the story. That's that reporter in me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very clear to me when I really started paying attention to that, what the story was. And I was only going to write the book if I felt I could move the conversation forward, because we've had a lot of great books written, and I've read all the best of them. But the story today, and what made me write the book, was that in the last 40 years, in my adult lifetime, America has become a nation of high-achieving women. Millions of us now, 3 generations of us now that I talked about. But we are leadership underachievers. And what I mean by that is women hold less than 18% of the leadership positions in any industry you want to look at.
Wow.
Everywhere. Everywhere. And we need to be, women are earning 3 out of 5 college degrees now. We're earning more master's degrees. We're earning more PhDs than men. The pipeline is absolutely bursting. And so our next work is making the leap to leadership.
Right. So, you know, you talk about how achievers become leaders, you know, in the last section of the book, and there are 7 practices total.
Yeah.
You know, what are they?
Yeah. And there's 3 pieces to becoming leaders. One is yes, these 7 practices. The other is we've got to help each other. Women, we've got to go for collective power. And third, we need men. Men have got to be not just on the sidelines cheering, but they got to be in the game with us, because men still hold most of the keys to the leadership locker room doors.
That's right.
We need men who understand that every industry will be better as talented women move into those positions. So the 7 that I talk about, and these are really the graduate work. This is for women who have mastered the foundation. They're already high achievers, and they believe their leadership material. Okay, you've mastered all that stuff, now go master this stuff. Number 1, you have to discover your purpose. That's your joy. Number 2, you have to raise your voice. Not find your voice. It's time for women to start raising our voices. That's all about communication skills. Number 3, break the rules. You have to learn the game before you can start and master the game, before you can start break the rules. Mm-hmm. But you lead by breaking the rules. Number 4, drink at dangerous waters. That's getting out of your comfort zone. That's crossing those cultural and gender, all those differences. Becoming multicultural, which you must be in the 21st century. Drink at dangerous waters. Next one,
get back in the saddle.
Get back in the saddle. Get back in the saddle is it's about failure. You know, you have to fail.
You do.
You have to fail. And did I skip one?
Yep. And then one more.
The last one is a word I made up, and that's called womaninity, and that's about leading as a woman. Because my generation, our only models were men. And we really tended to neuter ourselves. We played down our femininity. We had to, or otherwise we were being sent for coffee and asked to take notes. Yeah. You know, and so womaninity is about women now being very comfortable in our own skin and understanding that we bring strengths, unique strengths of our gender to leadership, and leading as a fully evolved woman. Because masculinity and femininity are not parallel words. Right. Femininity is kind of our softer side, right? We needed a word that's parallel to masculinity, of a fully evolved woman. And so I made that word up. That's called womaninity, and that's about leading as a woman.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, you know, particularly, you know, in light of a lot of the gender debates and, you know, what do we do in a country where, you know, both sexes are working, you know, we've got males, females, you know, and then what happens in between. who takes on what role. And the truth is, it's not one or the other. It really, they do go hand in hand.
They do. I mean, to me, God, or however you want to think about that higher power, got it right.